From rivals to soulmates, the love I never imagined. I didn't hate Julian Hayes at first, though it didn't take long to get there. He came into my life like a storm, newly hired as head of product development, the exact role I'd been working toward. I'd spent years proving myself, handling difficult projects, sacrificing weekends and climbing the ranks, but none of that mattered. Julian swooped in with a resume that looked great on paper, backed by charisma and a confidence that could be irritating, to put it mildly. He had this way of taking up space, of acting like the room was his to command. I didn't trust him, especially when he started proposing changes to projects I'd poured my heart into. He'd make suggestions, seemingly just to counter me, and he did it with this smug smile that made me want to scream. One day, after he'd criticized my pitch in a meeting, I pulled him aside in the hallway. I'd had enough. "Is there something you'd like to say to me, Julian?" I asked, arms crossed, trying to keep my voice steady. He just raised an eyebrow. I thought I was pretty clear in there. "I think the approach is safe, but it's lacking in vision." My jaw clenched. "Lacking in vision? You don't know anything about the work I've done on this project." He shrugged, barely bothered. "Maybe not, but I know what sells." It was the last straw. I was determined to outshine him, no matter what it took. A few weeks later, the competition was announced. Our company was testing a new model. Julian's team and my team would work on the same project, each with a chance to develop the winning idea. The best pitch would go live, and the lead would get a promotion. This was my shot to finally prove to everyone, and especially to Julian, that I could lead just as well, if not better. From day one, Julian and I were rivals in every sense. Every time I'd bump into him at the coffee machine, he'd smirk, leaning casually against the counter. "Ready to lose?" he'd ask, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I'd roll my eyes. "I'd be more worried about yourself if I were you, Julian." Our coworkers started to take notice of our constant back and forth. They'd laugh and whisper about our passionate rivalry, but there was nothing funny about it to me. Julian was an obstacle, someone who'd bulldozed his way into my career. He was my rival, and the only way to deal with him was to stay one step ahead. Late nights became routine. I'd work hours after everyone had left, fine-tuning ideas, refining pitches, preparing for every possible argument he could throw at me. And yet, even in my frustration, I couldn't help but admire his relentless work ethic. He was always there too, often the last person to leave, sometimes glancing over at me with an unreadable expression. It was almost like he respected me, or maybe I was imagining things. The company noticed the tension and, naturally, thought a team-building retreat would solve it. Much to my horror, I was paired with Julian for nearly every activity. It was almost laughable. Our supervisors thought forcing us to work together would smooth things over, but it only made everything worse. He had an opinion about everything, from the best strategy for a scavenger hunt to the right way to approach a simple trust exercise. One afternoon, after we'd been paired for a project pitch workshop, I snapped. We'd been bickering non-stop, and finally I turned to him, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Do you always have to be right about everything?" He smirked. "Only when I actually am right." "Oh, you're insufferable." I couldn't help it. I laughed, exasperated. For a split second, I thought I saw something soft in his expression, a flicker of vulnerability. But he quickly covered it with that infuriating smirk, leaning back and crossing his arms. "You're not so bad yourself," he said quietly, almost too quiet to hear. It was the first moment we'd had that felt real, without the usual banter or competitive edge. For the first time, I wondered if maybe there was more to him than the arrogance he wore like armor. That night, I needed some air. I wandered out to a small lake by the retreat site, hoping to clear my head. It was quiet, the only sounds coming from the wind and the distant hum of crickets. I thought I was alone, until I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and of course it was Julian. He looked surprised, but then that familiar smug smile appeared. "Running away?" he teased. "Maybe from you," I shot back, trying to hide the nerves in my voice. We sat down together on the dock, an uneasy silence settling between us. I wasn't sure why he'd followed me, or why he stayed. But then he asked something that took me by surprise. "Why do you hate me so much?" I glanced over, caught off guard by his tone. He sounded genuine, vulnerable even. I shrugged, struggling to find the words. You don't understand how hard I've worked to get here. And then you just come in and start changing everything. It feels like you're erasing everything I've done. He was quiet for a moment, staring out at the water. I'm not trying to erase you, he said softly. I came in wanting to prove myself. Maybe I pushed too hard. Hearing him say that, I felt something shift. Maybe he wasn't as arrogant as I'd thought. Maybe he was just as afraid of failing as I was. We sat there in silence, the tension between us no longer hostile, but charged with something else, and then without thinking, I leaned in. Or maybe he did. Our lips met, and it was like all that anger, all that frustration, turned into something fierce and electric. It wasn't a gentle kiss, it was full of fire, all the emotions we'd been hiding under our rivalry. When we finally pulled away, I was breathless, staring at him in shock. What does this mean? I whispered, barely able to get the words out. He looked at me, his eyes intense. I don't know, but I don't want to fight with you anymore. After that night, everything changed. We didn't tell anyone, but we started seeing each other after work, sneaking around like teenagers. Our rivalry didn't disappear, it just became something else, something intimate. In meetings, we'd still argue, but there was a spark, a hidden connection that only we knew about. One night, after an intense brainstorming session, Julian pulled me into his office. We talked about everything, our dreams, our fears, the reasons we'd both been fighting so hard. I'd never opened up to anyone like that, and neither had he. It felt like we'd found something real, something I hadn't even realized I was missing. But keeping things hidden was harder than I expected. Every time we'd sneak a glance at each other in the office, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. I knew that if anyone found out, it could ruin everything. The day of the competition results came faster than I'd anticipated. I was nervous but excited. If I won, it would be proof that I could lead, that all my hard work hadn't been for nothing. But when they announced Julian's team as the winner, I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. It wasn't just the promotion, it was everything I'd worked toward. That night, we met up, and I couldn't hide my frustration. I told him how much it hurt to lose, that it felt like he'd taken something I'd spent years building. He tried to comfort me, saying he'd help me with the next project, but it only made me angrier. Don't you get it? I snapped. This was my chance. I didn't need your help. I needed to prove that I could do this on my own. He looked hurt, and I knew I'd crossed a line, but I couldn't take it back. He stormed out, and for days, we didn't speak. After a week of silence, Julian showed up at my apartment. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't been sleeping either. He apologized, admitting he'd been afraid to be vulnerable with me, afraid to show any weakness. I didn't want you to see me as anything less than perfect, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I was afraid you'd lose respect for me. Hearing him say that broke down the last of my anger. I told him I didn't need him to be perfect. I just needed him to be real with me. We stayed up all night, talking through everything. For the first time, it felt like we were on the same team, not as rivals, but as partners. When we decided to make our relationship public, the reactions were intense. Some people thought it was great, while others questioned our motives. There were rumors that I'd used him or that he'd gone soft. The gossip was relentless, and for a while, it felt like everyone was waiting for us to fail. But we didn't. Instead, we pushed forward, proving to everyone, and ourselves, that we could make it work. We worked together on new projects, balancing our strengths and supporting each other in ways only we understood. After Julian proposed by the lake, our story became something of a legend at the office. People were shocked. The same coworkers who used to joke about our passionate rivalry were now watching our every move, like our love story was some kind of reality show. Some people congratulated us with real warmth, while others gave us knowing smirks or whispered that our enemies to lovers romance wouldn't last. It didn't take long before rumors started swirling that Julian's promotion had something to do with me, that our relationship was all part of some secret deal. At first, we tried to laugh it off, but it wore on us. Julian felt guilty, like his accomplishments were being dismissed because of our relationship. I was constantly worried about how I was being perceived, wondering if everyone thought I'd used Julian or that he'd used me. It was hard to ignore the tension between us, and the strain started to creep into our relationship. We leaned into being a power couple, hoping that by staying strong together, the comments would fade. But it wasn't easy. In every meeting, I'd catch myself second-guessing my words, wondering if people were thinking I was taking Julian's side or letting our personal lives affect work. Julian had it even worse. He was constantly torn between defending me and keeping things professional. One night, after a particularly tense day at work, I could feel him shutting down. We were sitting in his apartment, barely speaking as we ate dinner. I finally asked him what was on his mind, and he sighed, rubbing his temples. "I just feel like I'm losing respect, you know," he said, not looking at me. "People think I only got where I am because of you, and it's exhausting." His words stung, but I knew he didn't mean to hurt me. I'd been feeling the same way, worried that people saw me as Julian's fiancé rather than a leader in my own right. We sat in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts, until I finally reached over and took his hand. "We're in this together," I said quietly. "If we let them get to us, we're giving them the power. We know what we've worked for. We know how hard we've fought to get here." He looked up at me, his expression softening. "You're right," he whispered. "I don't want to let them get between us." Things seemed to settle down, but the pressure was still there, like an invisible weight we were both carrying. It all came to a head one night during a work event. Julian was talking with a senior executive, someone we both respected, and I noticed they kept glancing over at me, whispering. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just paranoia, but later that night, I overheard them talking. The executive made a comment about Julian getting ahead by sleeping with the competition. I felt a rush of anger, but Julian laughed it off, trying to act like it didn't bother him. Afterward, in the car on the way home, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "How can you just laugh about it?" I asked, frustration bubbling up. "They're questioning everything we've worked for, and you're just pretending it doesn't matter." Julian sighed, gripping the steering wheel. "Because if I let every comment get to me, we'll never be happy. I thought we agreed not to let them come between us. But it's affecting us," I argued, my voice rising. "I'm tired of pretending like everything's fine when it isn't." We argued all the way home, each of us pushing the other until we reached a breaking point. That night we slept in separate rooms, and I lay awake, wondering if this was a sign that we'd made a mistake. Had we let our ambition and our pride ruin something beautiful? The next morning I woke up to the smell of coffee. I walked into the kitchen to find Julian sitting at the table, 2 cups of coffee waiting. He looked up, his expression softened, and motioned for me to sit. "I'm sorry," he started, looking down at his hands. "I've been holding on to so much, trying to act like I don't care about what people say. But the truth is, it does get to me. I hate that people don't see how amazing you are, how much you've accomplished on your own." I felt a lump in my throat, the frustration and anger melting away. "I've been struggling too," I admitted. "I feel like we're constantly defending ourselves, and it's exhausting. But I don't want to lose us over this." We talked for hours, sharing our fears, our insecurities. For the first time, we let down all our walls, and it felt like a weight had been lifted. We agreed that we needed to support each other, no matter what anyone else thought. That conversation became the foundation of our relationship going forward. We learned to check in with each other, to be honest when we were struggling. The rumors and whispers didn't go away overnight, but we built a stronger bond, one that wasn't so easily shaken by outside opinions. A few months later, Julian and I were ready to take the next step. We planned an intimate proposal announcement party, inviting only close friends and family. But of course, rumors spread around the office, and people started speculating that we'd rushed into things. One coworker even suggested I'd trapped Julian with a rushed engagement to secure my position in the company. It hurt, but we decided to ignore the comments. We focused on each other, on the future we were building together. The proposal was everything I could have hoped for. He took me back to that same lake, the place where we'd had our first real conversation. As he slid the ring onto my finger, all the doubts, the whispers, everything faded away. In that moment, it was just us. was. But the peace didn't last. Shortly after our engagement, Julian got an unexpected job offer from a rival company. They were offering him a position with more responsibility and a significant salary increase. He was excited, but it felt like a punch to the gut. We'd finally found stability together, and now he was talking about leaving. I don't know, Julian. I just don't want this to be another way for people to question us, I said one night, struggling to hold back my fears. He took my hand, looking serious. I want to build a future with you, but this is a chance for me to prove myself, to show everyone that I'm more than just the guy who got the job because of his fiancée. I need this. I felt torn. I wanted to support him, but the thought of him leaving filled me with a sense of dread. I'd gotten used to having him by my side, and I didn't know what it would be like without him. In the end, I realized I couldn't hold him back. I told him to take the job, that I'd support him no matter what. But as he packed up his things and prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were heading into unknown territory. Adjusting to long distance was harder than I'd expected. We both threw ourselves into our work, trying to ignore the loneliness. We'd FaceTime every night, sharing our days, but it wasn't the same. The spark we'd built together felt dimmer, like we were slowly drifting apart without meaning to. One weekend, Julian surprised me by showing up at my door. He looked tired, and I could tell the separation had been wearing on him too. We spent the weekend reconnecting, talking about everything we'd missed. By Sunday night, as he was getting ready to leave, he took my hands, his eyes filled with determination. "Let's not keep doing this," he said, his voice firm. "I don't care about the rumors or what people think. I want to be with you, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it work." We agreed to set up a plan, alternating weekends, and even considering relocating in the future. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step forward. I realized that no matter how hard things got, we both wanted this relationship to last. Months passed, and Julian and I grew stronger than ever. We both faced challenges in our respective jobs, but we supported each other through every high and low. The gossip at work eventually faded, and people started seeing us not just as the rivals turned lovers, but as two people genuinely committed to each other. Finally, after a year of long distance, Julian was offered a role that allowed him to move back. The moment he told me, I felt like everything we'd been through was worth it. We moved in together, and our relationship felt new again, like we'd come full circle. Our love story hadn't been easy. It was built on rivalry, passion, and challenges that would have broken most people. But through every argument, every separation, and every doubt, we found a way to keep going.